Today on Coach's Corner, optimism is in full bloom at Nebraska right now. Spring practice open on Monday. Five-star QB Dylan Raiola is expected to be in Lincoln all weekend. And Matt Rhule is solidly in the honeymoon phase of his tenure at Nebraska. Coming off of just 10-22 record in the last 3 seasons, Nebraska hasn't appeared in a bowl game since 2016. I want to bring on coaching insider Jesse Simonton to talk a little Nebraska Cornhusker with me. Jesse, is this Nebraska project as big of a rebuild for Matt Rhule as it was at Temple or even Baylor?
No, he inherits a much better situation than kind of the 2 dumpster fires previously on his resume. I mean, Nebraska, for all of its ills and kind of problems the last few years, the foundation's there. It's a fan base that has almost unparalleled support. You are the state. You own the state. As the head coach of Nebraska, you're the most famous guy in the entire state. And so the fact that they have the NIL infrastructure, they have the fan support, the facilities continue to be improved. Trev Alberts, the AD, seems pretty solid there. So I think the infrastructure around him is a lot better. I think this is compared to kind of the rebuild that he had to do in Waco for what he's facing in Lincoln. This is kind of Chip and Joanne, or maybe doing, just a little bit of a remodeling instead of a whole, rebuild.
Yeah, you talked about the foundation, but besides a rabid fan base that supports this team no matter what parts of this roster foundation at Nebraska are salvageable, and which parts does Matt Rhule need to bulldoze still?
Well, the roster is something that he has come in and addressed immediately. But I think, again, kind of comparing what he did at Temple and what he did at Baylor, the fact that the transfer portal is now an avenue that he can use to his advantage is something that he didn't have the last 2 stops. Nebraska's brought in 11 transfers already this cycle. More are expected to probably come once the May window opens. And they've really addressed some needs, specifically in the front 7. They brought in some playmakers. They've targeted guys from, Power 5 schools like Georgia, bringing in 3 or 4 guys from the national champion Bulldogs. Chief Borders from Florida, a couple other offensive and defensive linemen from the SEC and Arizona State. And so, he's kind of early identified where do I need to initially address the holes. And then these next 15 practices, I think, are going to kind of be a continued evaluation of, all right, where is this roster? What else needs to be addressed? And how can we get Nebraska bowling as soon as year 1?
Chemistry matters as well, though. And with all the new players that Matt Rhule has already brought in, do you expect them to be aggressive and active in the portal after spring?
I do, and that's what I'm saying. I think the fact that he's going to, look at where his team stands after these 15 practices. Matt Rhule says this is his favorite time of the year. I have a column out on On3 detailing kind of why he believes practice is so important. And the proof is in the pudding for him. This is a guy who's kind of taken silly putty, recruits and 2- and 3-star guys that maybe had the measurables or the athleticism, but weren't necessarily football players. And he's turned those guys into NFL draft picks. And so he has a keen eye for talent. He is known as a shrewd developer. So he hopes to put those kind of, attributes. And the reason he was hired, to the field for the next 15 practices, see where Nebraska's at, and then again, maybe go and grab another guy or 2, whether it's at receiver, tailback, what have you, whatever needs they may have. I think that's going to be an avenue that he explores post-spring.
One position group that they do have a good bit of talent at is the quarterback position, and Jeff Sims, newly transferred from Georgia Tech, is getting a majority of reps this spring with Casey Thompson returning, but limited. How much of a threat is Sims to winning the starting job to open the season? And does Chubba Purdy factor in at all in this QB battle?
Chubba's going to get some extra reps this spring, just like you mentioned, because Casey's kind of rehabbing that shoulder. So he's not going to be able to be, full go. So that's going to at least open up a potential path for Chubba to maybe compete. But I think this is really a 2-horse race. And Sims is a guy who's intriguing. He hasn't really, put it all together yet. He has 30 career passing touchdowns to 24 interceptions, so turnovers have been a real problem. Casey Thompson has been the far more effective quarterback, but he's had more talent around him, whether it's at Nebraska or especially when he was at Texas, and he threw for 24 touchdowns 2 years ago. So I think that this battle will probably ultimately be decided in the fall. But there's a chance, and I kind of noted this in my piece, that, Sims has an open door here where if he kind of runs away with it, perhaps Casey ends up transferring elsewhere as a grad transfer post spring. And so this is at least an opportunity for Jeff Sims to impress Matt Rhule. The two, didn't know each other really prior to this transfer happening back in January, but Rhule was very familiar with Jeff Sims because the guy that took over at Temple after him, Jeff Collins, was Jeff Sims' coach at Georgia Tech. Matt Rhule and Jeff Collins are very close. And so he's kind of been on record about picking Jeff Collins' brain about Jeffrey Sims. And so let's see how this kind of materializes post spring. But I think there's at least a potential there for Sims to kind of grab at the job.
Yeah, interesting battle. Before I let you go, you noted that this is Matt Rhule's favorite time of year. So how much can Matt Rhule accomplish with 15 practices?
Yeah, and that's the hard part to kind of, unfold. I'm not really sure. I'm not, he doesn't really know, I think, what he's walking into. He's said earlier this week about, building this bond and brotherhood within the football team. They put him through a pretty strenuous 7-week off-season conditioning program. They were pushing sleds in the snow, doing a lot of different, kind of crazy stuff that kind of challenged these guys mentally and physically. But now how does that translate to the field? He noticed that this is a team that kind of lacks the details. And that was a huge problem for Scott Frost. They had one of the worst records, in college football history in one-score games. And it was the lack of attention to details that seemed, to be the difference in that, whether it was special teams or, boneheaded turnovers. So how much can he kind of fix that over the next 6 weeks? And then I think, it's going to be how much can we really, hammer down come training camp to really kind of, again, the goal in year one is to go bowling. And that would be a great success for the Cornhuskers in 2023.
All right, Jesse, thanks for joining Coach's Corner. We'll have you back on after spring to talk Nebraska and where this whole program sits. Thanks for checking in. Thank you for watching. Make sure you smash that subscribe button for me. And remember to check out all the videos on the On3 YouTube page.